The morning Cecily Ashmore found out. She was standing at the kitchen island in her robe, pouring coffee she wouldn't finish, watching frost creep along the bottom edge of the window. The kind of quiet Tuesday that doesn't warn you. The kind that just starts, the way every other Tuesday starts, and then doesn't stop being Tuesday even when everything changes. Her phone was face up on the counter. The notification came from the hotel app, the one linked to the corporate account she managed, because someone had to, because someone always had to, and it read booking confirmed, the Lakeview Grand, Banff, 2 guests. Suite 14, check-in Thursday. Cecily set down the coffee, she picked up the phone. She read it again. Her husband Ronan Ashmore was supposed to be in Banff alone. That's what he'd told her. 2 days, 3 nights, a leadership summit for mid-sized investment firms, something about regulatory compliance and the changing landscape of private equity in post-pandemic Canada. He'd talked about it the way he talked about most work obligations, with a mild performative exhaustion that she had stopped questioning years ago. 2 guests. She stood there for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed on the street outside. Somewhere upstairs their dog shifted on the bed and went back to sleep. Cecily Ashmore did not cry. She did not call him. She opened the hotel app, navigated to the account settings and looked at everything. She and Ronan had met in their late 20s at a firm dinner in Toronto. One of those terrible events with past hors d'oeuvres and too much ambient lighting. And people who spoke almost entirely in the third person about their own accomplishments. He had been funny back then. Genuinely funny, not the performing kind. He'd leaned against the wall next to her and murmured, "If one more person says circling back I'm leaving." And she had laughed so abruptly that a woman nearby had turned to stare. They'd been married 11 years. She was 43 now. He was 46. She'd spent the first 4 years of their marriage working her way up at a boutique financial advisory firm in Ottawa, and then Ronan had been offered a partnership opportunity in Vancouver, a restructuring play, a new fund, real growth potential, and she had followed, because that was the plan they had made together. She'd taken a step back from her own trajectory. She'd told herself it was temporary. Then she'd spent 6 years building something quieter and more sustainable. She ran the back end of their shared finances, the family trust her mother had left her, and a small but very solvent real estate holding company she'd incorporated under her own name, Ashmore Capital Partners. Ronan knew it existed. He didn't know its current valuation. No one had asked. That was the thing about being underestimated. People stopped asking. She didn't make a scene that Thursday morning when he left. She kissed him on the cheek, told him to drive safe, watched his silver Audi reverse out of the driveway. He was in a good mood. That almost made it worse. The particular brightness of someone who has something to look forward to. She made more coffee. She sat down at her desk. She pulled up 3 separate things at once. The corporate card statement, the hotel account linked to the firm, and the internal communications platform Ronan's fund used, to which she still had administrative access, because he'd set up the account on her email years ago and never changed it. It took her about 40 minutes to understand the full picture. Her husband had been bringing Ingrid Solberg, a 29-year-old associate who joined the firm 18 months ago, on what he'd been framing, internally, as client-facing travel. Vancouver to Calgary, Calgary to Banff, once 6 months ago Toronto to Montreal, business class on the firm's travel account, hotel rooms billed as single occupancy to the corporate card. Cecily had been signing off on expense reports. She had been, in the most literal possible sense, paying for it. She sat with that for a while. Her closest friend, a woman named Bet, called on Friday afternoon and asked how she was. Cecily told her she was working through some things. Bet, who had known her since law school though Cecily hadn't finished the degree, said, "That means you're already 3 steps ahead of the problem, doesn't it?" And Cecily said maybe 4. She hadn't decided anything yet. That wasn't true. She had decided quite a lot, but she hadn't announced it to anyone, including herself. There was a difference between knowing and committing to knowing, and she was still standing in the space between them. She'd been there before. After her mother died. After the miscarriage they'd never really talked about. After the first time she'd walked into a board meeting and watched 3 men instinctively direct their eye contact toward Ronan while she was the one presenting. She knew how to stand in that space quiet while her mind kept moving. What she was doing now, really, was building something. The same way she always built things. Methodically, without announcing the foundation before the structure was ready. She called her lawyer on Saturday. Not their shared lawyer. Ronan's golf friend whose office was on West Georgia. Her own lawyer, a woman named Deborah, sharp and unhurried, whom she'd been using for Ashmore Capital matters for 5 years. She explained the situation. Deborah asked 3 questions and said, "I'll send you a list of documents to pull together. Start with anything in your name only." "Already started," Cecily said. There was a brief pause. "Good," Deborah said. "Don't say anything yet, not to him, not to anyone." Cecily understood. She'd spent 11 years in a household where being the one who didn't raise her voice meant she was assumed to be the one with nothing to say. She was familiar with the value of not saying things. Ronan came back from Banff on Sunday evening with a gift, A small box of locally made chocolate from a shop in town, the kind of thing you buy at the airport or a hotel lobby. He set it on the counter and kissed her on the temple and asked what she'd been up to. Just working, she said. The Kellerman property finalized. And I restructured the trust distribution timeline. Nothing dramatic, just cleaner. He nodded with the expression of someone who has heard something and retained nothing. Great. Good. I'm starving. Is there anything? There's pasta in the fridge, she said. She watched him move to the refrigerator. He looked rested. He was in an easy, expansive mood, the way people are when they've been having a private life that satisfies them. She had seen it before, in clients, in acquaintances, and she recognized it now with a clarity that surprised her. Not because it was new information, but because she had been not looking at it for longer than she'd understood. She took the chocolate box and put it in the back of the pantry, behind a tin of chickpeas, and she went upstairs to let the dog out to the garden. The thing about Ingrid Solberg, and Cecily had looked her up carefully once, was that she was not unintelligent. That wasn't the issue. The issue, as far as Cecily could reconstruct it from the evidence available, was that Ingrid had been given access to things she should not have had. Confidential fund communications, proprietary deal structures, client relationship notes. Either she'd asked or Ronan had offered without thinking about the implications, which was exactly the kind of judgment lapse that could expose a firm to serious regulatory and fiduciary liability. Cecily made a note. She filed it carefully. She also noted that Ingrid was listed in the firm directory as having a dual reporting structure, ostensibly to the compliance team but in practice to Ronan, which meant that Ronan was, depending on how you read the employment terms, her direct supervisor. Which meant several things. None of them good for him. 3 weeks passed. She did not avoid Ronan. She did not behave differently around him. She bought groceries, attended a dinner party, handled the quarterly filing for Ashmore Capital, walked the dog in the rain on a Thursday evening, met Bet for lunch in Yaletown and said nothing useful. She moved through the life she had built around a marriage that was already somewhere else, and she let it carry her the way a current carries something that has learned not to fight it. She was not passive. She was accumulating. There is a kind of patience that looks like stillness but is actually work. She knew this. She had always known this. People who believed she was patient had never understood what patience cost. The moment arrived, not dramatically, on a Tuesday again. She'd been reviewing an invoice from the firm's travel account. She had removed herself from the administrative access quietly, but not before downloading everything she needed, when she found a new booking. Calgary to Kelowna, 2 passengers, business class. The conference was called the Western Private Investment Summit. She knew the summit. She knew its dates. She also knew that Ronan had mentioned it to her 3 days ago as a solo trip, which meant he had decided to bring Ingrid Solberg again. And he had done so not carelessly but deliberately, and he had looked at her across the dinner table and not considered it worth mentioning. She called Deborah. "I'm ready," she said. Deborah said, "The documentation is solid. Do you want to file before or after the trip?" She thought about it for a moment. "Before," she said. "But I'd like to make one other call first." The other call was to a man named Howard, who managed investor relations for the firm's primary limited partners, the institutional backers whose capital made the fund functional. Howard and Cecily had met at a charity gala 2 years ago and stayed in occasional professional contact, because she sat on the board of a foundation that overlapped with one of his LPs, and because Howard was meticulous and thorough and quietly allergic to reputational risk. She did not accuse anyone of anything. She called him about a different matter, a board governance question. And in the course of the conversation, she mentioned carefully that she had some concerns about access control and information security within the fund's internal communications, that she had recently become aware that certain confidential materials may have been accessible to individuals outside the appropriate clearance level. That she raised this only because she knew Howard's LPs had significant contractual provisions around fiduciary responsibility and information handling. Howard was quiet for a moment. "That's a serious concern," he said. "I know," she said. "I wanted to make sure you were aware before anything became public." Howard thanked her. His tone had shifted slightly. The particular professional tension of someone recalibrating what they thought they knew about a situation. She thanked him in return and ended the call. She had also separately spoken to the firm's compliance officer, a woman named Patricia, who reported to the board, not to the partners, and raised the same question about dual reporting structures and supervisory relationships. She did not name Ingrid Solberg directly. She referenced the firm's own conflict of interest policy and asked whether a recent review had been conducted. Patricia said she would need to look into it. Cecily said that sounded prudent. She hung up. She looked out the window at the garden, at the bare November branches. The dog was asleep on the back step, one paw hanging off the edge. The sky was the particular pale gray of a Vancouver winter afternoon, not dramatic, just present, just relentless. She was not angry. She had been briefly, in those first days, standing at the kitchen island with her coffee and her phone, feeling something hot and sharp behind her sternum. But anger was expensive, and she had decided to spend the resources elsewhere. Ronan left for Kelowna on a Thursday morning, business class. The firm had booked it. She knew the flight number, the seat assignments, the hotel. She also knew now that by Thursday afternoon, Howard's office would have sent a formal inquiry to the fund's board regarding LP information security provisions, and that Patricia had scheduled an internal review meeting for Friday, which Ronan would not be present for, which would concern a supervisory relationship that had not been disclosed to HR. She called Deborah after the car left the driveway. The papers were filed at 11:15. She had arranged for them to be served at the hotel, professionally, through a process server Friday morning, early enough that it could not be mistaken for anything other than what it was. He called at 6 in the evening Friday, she answered. Cecily. His voice was flatter than she had ever heard it, the easy expansiveness gone completely. Hello Ronan, she said, what have you done? Was quite a question. I filed for separation, she said. The paperwork is straightforward. Deborah can send you the summary. I'd suggest you get your own representation before Ma Silence, the firm. He started. That's a separate matter, she said. I raised some governance questions. That's entirely within my rights as a former signatory on the account and as a member of the Kellerman Foundation board, which has fiduciary overlap with 2 of your LPs. If the firm has nothing to hide, there's nothing to worry about. More silence. She could hear faintly the ambient sounds of a hotel corridor, a door closing, the hum of a climate system. You knew, he said. How long did you know? Long enough, she said. He said her name again, differently. The beginning of something, an explanation, a negotiation, a version of events she was not ready to receive, probably wasn't going to receive, because she had learned that the explanation was rarely the part that mattered. Ronan, she said, not unkindly. Get some sleep. Call a lawyer in the morning. She ended the call. The dog came and put his chin on her knee. She scratched behind his ears for a while, sitting in the chair by the window in the darkening room. Outside, the street was wet and quiet. Someone down the block had their porch light on. The houses in this neighborhood all looked solid and permanent from the outside. The deep lots, the old trees, the particular West Coast combination of cedar and glass and moneyed restraint. She had chosen this house, had chosen this street, had negotiated the price down $40,000. Because she'd done her homework, and the market had shifted and she'd known the timing better than the selling agent. She thought about that for a moment, the small, continuous acts of competence that a life requires. The ones that go unnoticed because the people around you are too comfortable to notice them. Bet texted her that night. Just, you okay? She typed back, getting there. In the weeks that followed, she moved through the practical architecture of separation with the same quality of attention she brought to everything. She was calm with Ronan when they spoke, which wasn't often. She was clear with Deborah. She was organized. She had already, some months prior, ensured that Ashmore Capital Partners was entirely separate from their shared assets. She had been meticulous about this, partly by instinct, partly because she had always known that the thing you own cleanly is the thing no one can take from you. The firm had its own difficulties to navigate. She wasn't involved in that directly, but the inquiry from Howard's office had expanded, as inquiries do when they find things, and the compliance review had confirmed what she had suspected about the supervisory relationship and the information access. She heard through professional channels that Ingrid Solberg had been quietly placed on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation. She heard through Bet that Ronan's partnership position was under review. She had not engineered these outcomes. She had simply made sure the right people knew where to look. The last thing she did before she put it away completely was go back to that hotel app, the Lakeview Grand in Banff, Suite 14. 2 guests. She canceled the account, not dramatically, just a few clicks. The kind of administrative task that takes 30 seconds and means nothing in itself, except that she was the one doing it, and she had always been the one doing it, and now she was the one who had decided she was done. She closed the laptop. She poured herself a glass of wine, a Niagara Riesling, the good one she'd been saving for no particular reason, and she took it out to the back garden. It was cold enough that her breath showed. The dog followed her out and stood in the grass with his nose working the November air, reading something she couldn't read. The sky to the west was still faintly lit, the last of the Vancouver dusk, that thin rose-gray light that doesn't quite give up. She stood in it for a while. Cecily Ashmore had not walked into any of this loudly. She had not announced herself. She had not threatened or performed or broken anything she'd have to clean up later. She had waited until she knew everything. And then she had moved with the quiet, deliberate precision of someone who understood that the greatest advantage you can have over someone who underestimates you is simply letting them keep doing it. Right up until the moment you don't. She finished the wine. She let the dog back inside. She locked the door behind her, and the house was hers, and she had always known it would be.